Hello again. I want to continue this journey of the case and want to pick up again on this concept of when you're working to a reverse engineered conclusion, if you like. So when you've decided on what your conclusion is before you embark on the process of discovery of information and so on, you have to create a whole narrative that supports that conclusion that you want to achieve. And this is, as I say, it's quite common. You see it in the current Labour government, as I said, first budget, deficit deception, or black hole deception in the second budget, similar thing, because they didn't want to tell you what they wanted to do. They wanted to create a narrative that suggested they were led there rather than the other way around. And this case was exactly the same. And I picked up on that, our case, pretty much instantly by the way the language they're using and the behavior. And part of that is knocking out any evidence that disturbs that reverse engineered conclusion. Hence, when we immediately put forward these very, very troubling journal stroke diary entries of older sister in terrible comments about her younger sister and how she wanted predicted if effectively she would end up on her own, which they were trying to build a narrative that she was a protective sister and so on and so forth, whereas we were ultimately proven right because she bolted and left her and abandoned her in her placement to the first real opportunity. There's also an interest in a boy who she was loading information onto a boy and a girl persistently, and they did what any reasonable intelligent kids would do at the time. They went to the school, so effectively she was loading them up with ammunition so they would do it for her. And I have no, I think in the circumstances I would have done the same as they did. But the significance is in the diaries there were some very, very odd entries about both, and I won't name them because they've been terribly mistreated in my opinion, and I wouldn't betray them for the world. Particularly the boy, there was a real interest in him. And as things progressed, and I want to say this as sensitively as I can, it was clear there was an asymmetry in how they viewed their respective relationship, if you like, or that's about as sensitive as I can put it. And actually, she went on to actually call when she was in her first, in theory, permanent foster placement, which my younger daughter, remains in, to bombard this boy with late night calls saying she was going to do this, that, and the other. And it had a shade of Saltburn about it, not as extreme in terms of what she was trying to achieve. Popular boy, and yeah, there was disturbing trends. So I'll leave it at that. But also in this process, you kind of need to make a corrupt system, which is effectively the emotional sterilization of children, a radicalization against their parents, effectively stripping them bare of their emotions, ready for long-term care orders to be traded off with private equity-owned agencies, which sit often in the same buildings as local authorities. It really is that incestuous. So what they do is you end up with a plethora of people that come and get involved. So you end up with a social worker, you end up with a child guardian, you end up with a child guardian solicitor, child guardian's barrister, you end up with an IRO, which is ridiculous, an IRO, independent reviewing officer. In this case, started off as Angela Nolan, and we immediately showed how she'd falsified a statement, and I'll go through that. Yeah, because remember she said that I, in terms of this broken arm, picked up and threw daughter against bookshelves, and even though there was no no other injuries at all to suggest that. And yeah, this is a woman that's put up as independent, um, and ex-social worker, of course, employed by the local authority, of course, friends with the social worker, of course, and it's faux independence beyond any credible way of which you could see it as independent. And actually, the Guardian as well, who works for CAFCAS. CAFCAS is a very, very murky organisation which isn't independent, and these guardians aren't really independent. Again, they've worked the system, they've gone through the system, and this is a woman that's independent. I remember the first hearing that Hudson presided over. Immediately, said that I'll meet the parents soon. I'll be in touch. Actually, that went on for about 3 months, and we had to really, really chase her to have a meeting. So it's faux by any stretch of the imagination. In terms of the IRO, never wants to meet. Same as the current one. We'll come on to him. He's verbally abused my wife and left her quite traumatized after virtual care meetings. Never wants to meet, never wants to discuss heritage and so on and so forth. So you can see it's designed to, how can we take as much out of this system and make it look legitimate? It's probably the best way I can describe it. Now, I want to go back to this IRO because it's something she did that was aligned with this cultural genocide, this emotional sterilization. She described the girls as, without ever meeting us, of course, as brought up in Northeast culture. Neither myself or my wife are from this region. Um, and we challenged on that. I said, well, it's a bit like Keir Starmer when he was coming out saying far right, far right, far right. Yeah, nobody ever said to him, what do you understand far right as being? Which, of course, he's not intelligent enough to understand how to answer that question. And same with her. We sort of said, well, this is actually not true. You put this down on paper, which the documents still have. No consultation with us. And beyond that, what is Northeast culture? Can you define what you said they've been brought up in? And she declined to answer the question, rather like South Tyneside when we said, well, why did younger daughter lose interest in the heritage that she was very proud of up until after you took her into care? And that's the process you get is in this distorted dystopic narrative that we live in and we see so often now. If you ask the question of somebody that doesn't fit that narrative, they'll pretend that question just doesn't exist. They won't answer that question. You listen to a politician now, things like that. They will not answer the question that they've been asked. They will answer the question they wish they'd been asked. And because we don't really have what you would necessarily call a free press, they're able to ride and ride and ride that. And they'll never be interviewed by somebody they know is tenacious enough to keep nailing them down. So it's a similar process as that, actually. And there were other things as well. There was a statement put up quite early by the pastoral lead, who said a very, very murky process where she'd been engaged with Kim Simpson at the South Tyneside in illegally preventing us from picking up our younger daughter. And my wife arrived at school and I arrived. They kept us effectively almost soft detained us effectively in the headmaster's office until this police order could come through. So it was an illegal act. So she produced a statement, and there were also, as I've covered in the previous videos, we've raised safeguarding violations relating to younger daughter and older daughter. And that really rattled the school because they were trying to effectively cultivate this image of tremendous safeguarding because they were recovering from a very scandalous bullying incident a few years prior. So it was really rattling them. So we were sort of saying, with this statement, there's some real serious conflicts of interest here. But that was obviously not dismissed because it's not part of the narrative. So, that was. And in these hearings, these case hearings, the local authority completely and utterly dominate them. You are allowed hardly anything. You can't even call it scraps on a table. So you'll never really get it's always structured in a way where you can't raise any issues because they can completely dominate it. And the judge just waves that through and waves through anything that you can challenge it, this reverse engineered narrative, they in essence will just dismiss. So that's really how it works. And in many ways, it kind of, when the FCA and things started coming up, it started to I started to see the same trends, because as I discovered, when they wanted effectively me to make a witness statement, which was on the premise that you couldn't discuss the FCA's role prior to their intervention. So all the whistleblowing, the catastrophic errors on supervision, enforcement, money laundering, and so on couldn't be discussed. So it was a completely faux narrative. It was the same trend, and and it came right back to me. I thought, this is the same game in essence. It's similar if you look at FCA and WealthTech. One massive concern that you'd have on that now is the FCA fined Barclays for saying, well, they didn't carry out the basic check whether there was authorization to have a client money account. And there was a very, very light fine relative to the amount of money they allege went through this account, on the basis that they cooperated. Now, if you imagine cooperation includes them making a witness statement on the premise that they've had a light fine, you start to again see some very, very murky conflicts of interest. It's the same as senior people at WealthTech in portfolio management and compliance and operations, who were far, far closer to the system than I ever could be. I didn't even have any access to operations and dealing or anything. I just wrote research notes and came to a conclusion nobody wanted to go along with. But the FCA will need those to provide witness statements. And yet, essentially, you could look at it and say, well, did they conduct their duties with due care and diligence? And you kind of start looking at that and thinking, there are some very murky aspects of that too. And let's not forget that the FCA criticised Barclays for not merely checking their list. Well, I said to them, why don't you go to Newcastle and check these assets under management claims that are on the website, and just turn up and say, where is this money? Just print it out. We'll speak to the alleged custodians and so on and so forth, and we'll get to the bottom of this. And it would have unraveled straight away. So the failed are relying on the failed and beating the failed. It's all extraordinary, and it's the same in this process in some ways. And I want to, and if you think about it, so how can you seriously claim that a child's heritage and her background has been respected and was always intended to be respected when you had that 3-week period where she was allowed no access to Polish, completely cut off from her mother, apart from a couple of brief phone calls under duress. And then the first time you were allowed to see them in a centre of their own choosing, banned from speaking Polish. Then IRO also says brought up in Northeast cultures. So you can see that cleansing process was already at play. It was always designed to destroy the link to the parents and completely cleanse the heritage to make her a cash generative asset. So these are quite serious things. And this is why, in essence, confronting the FCA with this conflict of interest, saying that I won't go along with this sterilized with this fantasy narrative. You have to tell the truth. You have to be honest with people. You can't issue misleading statements and so on and so forth. And then, from my own experience, actually, we started looking at Kirsten before that. My own experience and seeing how children are effectively being sterilized into assets and fed into private equity-owned agencies, and how all this linked to the financial system, you can see, and then challenging a judge and saying, look, here's a statement, and we'll come on how this statement was built, that was unsigned, and the key witness said he never saw it, and we now got a child as well, despite warning you throughout the system throughout the process that their heritage was being destroyed and dismissed. You know, there are issues of corruption and racism here. And then, isn't it strange that already I've been receiving this coercion, threats from the FCA, threats from the local authority, blackmail for the local authority. Then the judge all of a sudden makes this harassment claim. And if harassment is uh, challenging her on corruption and racism, then that must be harassment. But to give them the pretext to come into the house and seize devices and search for 2 hours, they had to create this faux allegation of spray painting a car, no CCTV images. Apparently, she sat on this allegation for 9 and 10 months, and then during my interview, I'll actually post this in the response we received from the family court to show you. In the interview, I was accused of reacting poorly to a response from the family court 2 months after the second spray paint incident. So I would have needed the time machine to go back, which I can only assume a judge that would have CCTV in their house, around their house and car or drive. That's how I got around the CCTV, because I was using a time machine. So yeah, you can see. Next up, I will take you on how the evidence starts to be falsified and how they build this false narrative. And that will take place from the parental assessment, which is conducted by Donna Grant. Essentially, what happens with social workers is the first one, Skelton, who they set up with this initial blackmail on the Polish. She was daft enough to do it, but the Polish blackmailing us against why speaking Polish and even me using Polish words and so on. Her job was to get that initial care order. The job of Grant, which where they put a lot of resource into this, because this is a big driver for them, is to get you to that long-term care order. This is where the real nasty tricks start, and that's where I'll take you in the coming videos. Take care. Bye.